So we've touched on the Releases tab and the Teams tab. That's the two of the three things. The last one I touch on is the Scope one. And this is probably where you do, once you've set up the other two, you probably spend most of your time in the Scope tab. And this is where we are assigning all that work to Releases, and say this is when I want to release it, and to people. And these are the people that are going to work on it. Now, just a little bit of navigation for this, just so you know what we're looking at. So as you know, we've got this schedule at the top here, and we're going to spend most of our time in that in a second. Underneath here, I've got my backlog of work based on, that's my scope of work based on the boards that I brought in. So I've got, I'm looking at these are an epic level. You'll see over on the right hand side here, I can change that down to a story level and get all of my stories. And it's obviously changed my view at the top to stories per sprint at the moment that's on. We can also go up a level to initiative, which was originally brought in as a level above epics, for the idea that I want to plan things that I have epics in different projects and different streams, and it's a part of the initiative that we're working on. I actually want to see it at an initiative level, and we'll have a look in the second half about how we can actually customize these levels now. So if you do want to have another half a dozen, because you're for whatever reason, then we can do that and how to manage it.
Is the initiative the equivalent of the program level that was shown on the first slides, or is that something?
No, it absolutely can be. It absolutely can be. Different people use it in different ways. So some people have features in between, or there's features before epics, but yeah, absolutely. It's just the next level up, and an initiative has in it epics, and in the same way that epics has in it stories. So yeah, so it can be whatever you want it to be. I'll stick an epic view for now, just to let you know what we're looking at. This is a prioritized list. I can drag these up and down the same way that I can drag up and down stories within them. I can also look at my stories here. I don't necessarily have to change the view. I can sort of see that nested hierarchy as we go in. I'll talk a bit more about the prioritizing in a second, because it's brought this priority from your boards, because someone had already prioritized it. Another thing to get our head around here that's quite funny is, because most people who try Portfolio are using JIRA already, we then are trying to make a plan based on information we've already got, and we're doing it like a funny way around. The kind of other way of thinking about this is, once you get used to it, that you would actually create your plans in Portfolio and plan ahead, and then push those information down and create your projects and your issues and stuff from there. I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a second. Just in terms of what we're looking at, so that's the three sort of hierarchy views you can switch around between there. These columns here can be titled Releases, Story Points. I can add and remove these columns using the cog on the right. So I might want to see what teams are working on this. Start date, end date, themes, which we'll talk to. So I can add and remove these columns. Because I'm presenting, it's actually, the screen's not as spacious as it normally is in your own computer. You can drag them in and out and stuff as well, and move them around. Now, this doesn't actually present very well, but you'll see that some of these columns have got like a blue background. They're highlighted, they're shaded in blue. It's much clearer on your own computer. What that means is that Portfolio has designed that. It has calculated that value for you. If it's in white, it's because I have said I want to assign this, and I've made it and I've forced it. So just to show you what I mean, this one here at the top, is in blue. That is set to calculate. And what it's doing is, Portfolio is looking at all of the information and saying, I think you should put this in this release based on what you've told me, based on who can work on it, based on the start dates and end dates, the number of points you've got, the skills, everything else. That's the best thing. And this is the power of Portfolio. This is what you really want it to do. It's going to look at everything. You give it some ground rules and some barriers, and it will work out the best way of doing things for you. Yeah, this is the power of Portfolio. It's working out the best thing to do for you. Not doing what a lot of people try and do, which is, I'm trying to make Portfolio show me the exact plan that I've got in my mind, which is, these people have to work on this in this order. There's no point putting in Portfolio. You know what you're doing. The benefit of Portfolio is saying, with all this information, what is the best way to get stuff done the quickest with the fewest people, to get the most stuff in, true to the values of agile. If we can get more stories with a higher value, prioritize wise, complete in a sprint, then let's do it. But the reason that we can force down values is, sometimes this person has to do this task, or this has to go first. It's not the highest priority, but for other reasons, in the business, we have to push this one first. And in that case, you literally just force it. So instead of saying this is calculate, I can just pick it and force it, and then that will be in white now because I've actually forced it in. So that's the biggest thing to understand is what you're looking at. If it's in white, you've made it that way, leave as much as you can in blue and calculate, and portfolio will work out the best way of doing it for you. Now in terms, yeah?
Sorry, once you change that, do you need to recalibrate or it recalibrates?
Yeah, exactly right. So in this version, what we do is this calculate the button here will change everything else based on the assignation you've just made. These members have come up because I've added them in on the last tab, and I hadn't hit calculate since then. And it's good that way. It doesn't do in portfolio 1 you could set it to do automatic. This way it's it depends on your system, and again this comes down to how big your system is, how many issues you've got. If you're doing a plan with 100,000 issues, you don't necessarily want it to be recalculating every time you make one change. So you will update, and what that's doing is it's updating your plan. It's not doing anything else. We'll talk about that in a second. It's just updating your plan and saying, based on the change you just made, what's happened. So I'll change it, calculate, look, don't like it, change it back. So move on like that. And the main things that's changing in terms of a visual, you'll see at the top here, is our schedule. So a couple of things to touch on there. This is not a Gantt chart, although whenever anyone says, I need a Gantt chart for my projects, because I've always had a Gantt chart and they look nice in reports, and you show them this and they go, oh perfect, that's great. But it's very similar. It is giving you a time phase view of, in this case, epics, and what we can work on and what's working in parallel, and this is time with our releases down the bottom here, the start and finish of our releases. I can change the view of that. As you know, if I change my view to story, now stories will actually give us per sprint, because we've said that this is a Scrum team's working on this. We know we're in sprint, and it's going to put each of our stories on there. Now the great thing is at the moment we can view this. The sprints are obviously always going to be by team. If I just go back to our epic view, these options at the top here let you change the view of the schedule. You're not actually changing your plan, you're just changing what granularity you're looking at. So I can split this and say, just show me it for one project, for example, and it'll change it. I can just do it by releases and see what's in each release. It really just finding the view that's going to suit you. Teams is also a good one. You can split it up by teams and what have you there. Over on the right hand side here, we have some more options in terms of view. Do I want to have a global view or split it into my projects that way? Do I want to group them by team or by person? You can do that. I can colour by theme, which we haven't got in here. I'll talk about that afterwards. And what level of zoom. So this top half of the section, this top half of the page, sorry, is all just to do with how this view looks. This is just a visual representation of everything that you've told it so far under the table underneath. When we're talking about where does information come from, so I had a couple of questions about priority, about dependencies and what have you. So where this comes from, so bear in mind when we started with this, I'm just going to open these in a couple of separate tabs. That board and, oops, our Android board. So this is my iOS app board. This is the core JIRA for those who are used to it, where I've got a board and this is what my team are working on and these are the stories they're working on. This is where I pulled all the information from. Now the actual priority of the issues on this board are the same as priority of the issues here. Now I've got these mixed in, but if you look at anything that starts with iOS 1, 9, 20, these are my epics down the side here. Maybe if I go to a story view. So you can see there's all my stories there, based on all my stories there. Now the great thing about it is, if I look at my active sprint, iOS 3, 4, 5, when you are dragging things up and down here, and I want to commit those changes down. So bearing in mind this calculate is changing, updating my plan, and it's also, the other thing we didn't touch on this calculate does is, it pulls up the latest information from the project. That's really important. So if someone's added or changed something on your project, on your board, if they've reprioritized the list on the project board, when I hit a calculate, or when I open portfolio, or when I change something in here, it's pulling that up again. So you're always planning with the most up-to-date information, and that's really important. when we talk about making plans, there's this kind of planning cycle that we should kind of go through, and that's that we create a plan, we communicate that to our teams, they then go and work on it, and then as they're working on it, we take that information and we feed it back, and we have to kind of go around that. So we make our plan, we communicate that to people, they work on it, they do it differently than we said, and we feed that back in and we replan. And it's that kind of cycle that I think that a lot of people are missing when they try and use a tool. They think, great, we've got this, it's just going to work. We do need a little bit of discipline in how we actually run our processes internally. And it's when we say communicate your plan down, that can literally be by committing the changes. And what that means is, you'll see whenever I've changed anything, I've had this little orange marker. And that means it's something that you've changed that is different to how it is in real life. So anything that's got the orange marker is, this is different to what the people down in the projects and the teams are using. And you'll see that up here, we've got this orange marker, 14 uncommitted changes. This is great. Once I've got a plan and I've moved everything around and I've changed stuff and I've changed it back and I've added a new person in and I've taken them out because the boss said no. Once I've got a plan I like, we can then go to our uncommitted changes and we can review and commit the changes back down as a team if we want, and say, yep, I'm happy with those changes, apart from that one, I can't get a new dev. I could have taken them out and it would have disappeared from here as well. And commit the changes. What that is doing is pushing those changes down to projects. So whoever's looking at their Scrum board is now going to have it in a different order, or have the person assigned that we've said to do it. Now I can't do one, because I'm trying to, in real life this doesn't happen as much, but basically I'm trying to I'm trying to make a person do a job that isn't available on that project or that team to do the job. And that's good. It's telling you you can't do that based on what you've told me. Either you've told me the wrong things, or I didn't realise that and that person's not there, I need to go and do it. So as soon as you open your plan again, or as soon as you hit calculate, it brings that information straight back up into JIRA. So we'll maybe have a look. This iOS 4 here, which is 10 points. If, it's not going to let me edit it here, is it? Let's say, okay, I wanted to change that from the version that it's going to be in, which is iOS 1, and I'll change it to my release train A, which we now know is, I created that earlier and that's been pushed down into this project, so we know that's working. I'm going to update that. When I have a look back on my plan here, you can see that it's based on iOS 1, but as soon as I hit calculate, it's going to pull that information straight back up, and it now knows it's in release train A. So the great thing is you are always planning with the most up-to-date information, which is great, because other times if you just suck up the information out to begin with and you don't have this bit, you could be out of whack really quickly. A couple of quick things just talking about syncing up and down, just to get your idea, because this is really different in Portfolio 2 and it's fantastic. We touched on dependencies. So we've been looking at all of our issues in our backlog here. Whenever I click on any, just like anything else in Portfolio, I get a kind of detailed box over to the right here. And this tells me if I want to put an earliest start date constraint on it. This is again for those people, those waterfall people who have milestones that they have to adhere to. That's quite useful. Description and things. You see I've got no dependencies here, but I can do, I'll maybe just move this. Maybe I can do it at an epic level as well. It might be a bit easier to see things changing that way. Let me just go back to our epic level. So iOS 9, I'll tell you what, iOS 20, that's even better. 20 is coming after 1. I'm going to add a dependency onto this epic and say that this issue is blocked by iOS 9. And I can just search from that there. I can type it in, which means I can't start this epic until iOS 9 is finished with what I'm telling it. Add a dependency in. When I calculate, you'll see that it's actually going to change things around now, and now I have to do iOS 9 before I can do iOS 20. And it's actually got these little bars on the end, so if I click on it, it will actually highlight on my schedule what the dependency is between them. And again, we'll look at, just in coming up, how you control what issue links are actually applied to. But that's really useful as well. So if you are hell-bent on designing a house, and instead of using MS Project or something, then you can have these dependencies all the way along, and it'll just be one starts, finish, and it won't be a Gantt chart going down, it'll just be one long line of things which I don't advise you do. But if that's what happens, then that's how it works. Very last thing I want to show you, just in this section, is the idea that if I pick a story here, iOS 4 will probably do. So you've got this plan and you're doing stuff, but while that's happening, people are here and they are actually changing stuff and adding subtasks and doing things like that. So I'll just call this subtask 1. So they've done this work now, but I'm looking in my plan and I don't necessarily have that, and that's linked to iOS 4, which is, if I go back to my story view, iOS 4 is here. I don't have anything underneath it. But as soon as I hit calculate, you can see this little arrow's popped up the side now. I now can see my subtask 1 that's been pulled up there, and it's actually going to aggregate all of my my points estimation or my hours estimation, aggregate that up to the top, so I'm always going to get an idea of exactly what's happening. It happens from subtask up to story and up to epic and up to initiative that you got above. You can get that view, rolled up view of how long things are going to take. So again, get your teams to do all the hard work and estimating things, and then you get this lovely top-down view of what's going on. I just want to touch on a couple of the other kind of configuration stuff points that we've had so far about how we can customize the plans at a plan level or a global level, and just show you the options that are available, because there's a couple of great ones that are new, again, with this latest Portfolio 2 that just came out last month. The first is under the general configuration administration. Now this applies to Portfolio as a whole for your instance, so this is, administrators will come in here and set this up, and this will apply to all the plans that you make moving forward. And the useful bit in here is this idea of a hierarchy configuration. Now, those who have used JIRA before, and JIRA Agile and old money JIRA software, version 7 onwards, is epics and stories and subtasks are baked into JIRA. They're everywhere. And that relationship, that kind of parent-child relationship is there in all the reports and boards and things that you look at. What's really useful is we can actually add new levels of hierarchy. So I already created one which we looked at earlier, which was initiative, and I mapped it. I've got an issue type called initiative. I can add another level above that or below that. Let's say feature, and if I want to have feature linked to, I don't think I've got one called feature. That was short-sighted. I'll say change. Link it to an issue type. Now, good governance and good practice means that you have to make sure these issue types are available in the projects that you're there for. Normal JIRA rules and laws apply. But what we're saying is, great, so anything that's that level in JIRA, I want to be able to reference it in Portfolio and actually be able to roll that information up in Portfolio and get those great views of consolidated and aggregated story points or hours or progress, which we've not looked at. We'll have a look at that as well. So we can actually add these levels up above here, which is great, and you can change what level they go to. Now, epics, the story level is for all other issue types that are unassigned at the moment. The great way of using story, out the box, story and epic is Portfolio already knows the relationship between them. If you've got bugs and you want to bring bugs up, or you've got change requests, or you've got tasks or anything else that you call your everyday stories, if you like, you can absolutely bring them in. You just have to tell Portfolio what the relationship is. You have to say they belong to this epic. If you just use the out-the-box story in epic, it knows that already. So it's just, again, it's a little bit easier. So that's one of the new features there. One of the good questions that came up in the break, and we'll pop it up for afterwards, is about whether or not we can change, if you have a level in between epic and story, if you're doing sort of safe and you've got feature maybe in between there, or depending on how you do it. So you can have a think about that just now. The other thing I want to touch on in here is dependencies. Remember we said we can bring these dependencies. So if this is blocked by something, it will actually, if someone says that down at the board level, it'll come up into my plan and it'll sequence it accordingly. Likewise, in my plan, if I do it, it's going to push it down. We can say what other link types, because those who use JIRA know there's loads of different issue link types. This relates to this is blocked by this is starts before this is duplicates by this. So all of the link types you have in JIRA, you can say I want to bring that in, and that's going to be create a dependency, and you can say whatever it is here. That's a bad example, but you can actually decide what issue links to bring up and what ones to ignore. So if someone says, oh, this relates to that issue, I don't care at a planning stage, I just want you to get the work done. So you can decide which ones come up and which ones you push back down, which is great. I'm just going to go back into my plan and show you a couple of plan-specific options that you can change, which is really interesting. And up here, next to the date, they've got this little drop down here. We can configure the options for our plan. Now, under the second tab here, this is, sorry, just while we're here, that was the kind of calendar and stuff that we're using for this plan. We talked about at a plan level. This scheduling is really interesting. This is going to say, how do you want portfolio to behave? Things like the maximum number of assignees per story. So this is our pregnant women example. How many people are we going to throw at a story? Oh great, well you've got 10 people, let's all work on it and you'll be finished in 20 minutes. Probably not that practical. There's a law of diminishing returns there, I'm sure. So we can say, well, what's the maximum number of people you can do? We can also change things about if you've got dependent story constraints. Sometimes we might say, if this story is, if I've got a story and it blocks Martin from doing his story, it will schedule my story in a sprint before Martin's one. Even if it's only an hour's job, it will just assume I'm going to do it at some point in that sprint. It doesn't care when. It might be knowing me, it'll be 4 to 5 on a Friday that I do it. So it's not going to make Martin have it to do it in a sprint until I've definitely finished it in my sprint. But we can change it and say, well, do you know what? If there is time to do both in a sprint, then schedule them both in a sprint, and we'd have to make sure that we actually do, we get them both done there. So we can decide that, and again, this is on a plan-by-plan basis. The minimum work package size, stage sprint size, there's good context and descriptions next to each of them that will show you what they do. Another thing I want to point out here is this issue assignee import level, because we're assigning people and things, but sometimes you might rather that just happens down at the team level. I just want to get I don't care I know what team is doing it, I don't need to know it individually which person. So we can decide at what level of our hierarchy do we want to bring that information and push it back down to. So subtask might be enough sometimes, ignore that. We might want to have it all the way up to the top. So again, you can pick that here or not use it at all, whatever works. But the best thing in here is the idea of stages and skills. Now again, this is a really interesting way of, when you've got a story, the story might say, create website portal. But there might be other parts to that. There's a design element of that task, and then there's an implementation element, and different people and different teams do it. So instead of having to split our stories into two, we can actually add stages, which are just this idea of sequential work. We have to do the design bit before we can do the implementation, and have skills as well. Because this ideal world where we're all cross-functional teams and we can all do everyone else's work, I've yet to see. So we have got restraints where only certain people can do certain things, so that's where we can add in skills to things. And this is taking your plan to the next level. I'll just add a couple in to give you an idea. So if I had a stage called design, and I'll add another stage called, I love typing in front of an audience, implementation. I don't even think that's spelled right. And what it's automatically saying, okay, well, is it 50% of each story will have a design element and 50% will have or Epic will have an implementation element. I can obviously change that and say, well, actually, no, the design element's going to be 20% and that's going to be 80%, which has obviously worked out itself. We can also add skills for each area. So in skill, we might have UX and I'll just call it web, and implementation, or whatever that says. We'll have OS and testing, for lack of a better example. And again, I can say what percentage of each is here. So what does that actually mean with our plan? Well, it means a couple of things. When we go back to our plan, and I'll maybe go back to our Epic view. See my story points here? I can actually now extend this out. And I can say it is now working out based on the story points and the percentage I've said, how much for each design part and how much for the implementation part. And again, I can stretch that out, and I can go and change each of these individually if I want to, and it will keep it balanced and work out what it is. So we can actually start to really nail down a very specific thing and a specific plan, saying this is the elements and the skills required to do this each stage, and this is the stages are sequential, I must say. So it's going to do design first before you do implementation. Under teams as well, what we now have to do for each person, you'll see that we have this design and implementation part here. So I need to go in and say that, well, I'm pretty good, so I can do everything, and I'll just push them out. And say who can do what job. So what that's going to mean is, when I calculate my plan, it's going to be totally different what it actually is trying to do based on the skills I've got it. And we'll see when we look at the report section how this gets really powerful, because if it knows, it's planning because based on some relation that you put here, it can give you some insight as to what you need to do to make that better if you've got any bottlenecks and things. Where it's useful, I'm just going to change this to a story view. Now if I look at a story view, you can actually see that it looks a little bit different. It's actually put it into our stages. And what that means is, it will actually highlight my one story, iOS 2, it's showing me the two different stages of that story. Now I've said that they can happen in the same sprint, because there's enough time, that's fine. If not, it might have put it into the next sprint, depending on the options that we just did in the plan configuration a second ago. So it's really useful to be able to give you this view of what has to happen first, and without you having to split everything out and see what it is. And obviously it's the skills thing. Now, another interesting thing that I've done in the past is when we're looking at resources for a government agency, and they actually created some virtual resources as machinery. It was scanners that can only do certain things, and that was going to be one of the resources that you had, was going to limit how fast you could do things. So you had a scanner that only had that skill scanning, and any of the tasks that you've assigned that needed that skill would be sequenced one after the other, so that scanner, which was going to control how quickly you could get things done. So it's really interesting, this concept of skills. It's for when you don't have cross-functional teams. It's for when you need that one architect, and that's going to be what's going to hold you back on your work. Then you put the skills in, and only that person has it. In terms of what we've been talking about now, so the scope, teams and releases, we've covered quite a lot, but you'll start to see that you spend most of your time in this scope tab, making changes, tweaking it. Are you happy? Is it doing what I thought?